Intergenerational trauma isn't a theory, it's genetics. So if we go back 3 generations, well, what was happening?
They left homes, they left their families and came here to start from scratch all over again in a country where they didn't even know the language, and that's still in their minds. The reason they weren't home is not because they didn't love them. They needed to survive. For new parents, how can they say, because I went through this, let me change myself so that when I become a parent, as like if they have toddlers, how can I not pass that on to them?
You're having arguments in front of your child.
If a couple says, oh, we're going to couples therapy, the first thing that you think about is like, oh, what's wrong? Angie Agrawal Holstein, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Janine.
Oh, no problem. So first, before we even get started, I really want to say I have a lot of respect for the work you do. And this is coming from my heart because I know we're both in a community where mental health has a lot of stigma. So being in that space and the type of work that you do, it's so inspiring. And I just hope there's more of this work in our community. So to start off, I was reading through your bio. So 25 years of experience in the mental health care space, 11 years as a social worker for CAMH, and now you're the founder of Shanti Psychotherapy. So I want to know, like, what inspired this journey to become a therapist, especially for the South Asian community?
Yeah, it's been a long journey, actually, and it sort of starts with a bit of a funny story that my father always, I would say both my parents really wanted me to be a doctor. No-brainer in our culture. And that's what I said I was going to do by the time I was like 4 years old. And I had this lovely opportunity in grade 11 to do a co-op at a hospital. And I got to see surgery. And I came home and I was like, nope, not going to do that. That is gross. Lots of admiration and respect for our physicians, my goodness. And I'd always had a leaning towards like curiosity about behavior. And I think some of it was also just trying to sort out my family members, like what was happening in my environment around me, socially as a girl and growing up in a small town. And it just kind of flipped from medicine to psychology. And I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. So I went to university, and my parents were really worried about me not going and doing my master's right away. It's like, you'll never go back, oh no. And I was very adamant about, after I had my psychology degree, that I wanted to work in the field and really understand, did I like it? Was it correct for me? Like, was it a good fit? And then also, like, where did I want to spend my time work-wise? And I ended up being able to work at a day program with people with intellectual disabilities and major mental health issues. So a really, I would say, what people would say, part of our population and so deserving of our care.
Yeah.
It was the most enriching work to work with people with autism and developmental disabilities, dual diagnosis. I learned so much and really got interested in major mental health issues. That's really where I wanted to land. I wanted to work in a psychiatric hospital. And so I thought I wanted to be a psychologist, and then I learned more about social work from my partner at the time, who's still my partner. His aunt was a social worker, did really grassroots work in Manitoba. And basically after a dinner with her, I was like, I want to do what you do. And that's how I ended up in social work. So it was a bit of a windy place. And, throughout my work history, whether it was at CAMH or Havergal, I really started to notice how it felt to sit with clients from South Asian background, my own feelings, what I felt coming from them. And I didn't have language at that time because we only started to really learn about anti-oppression frameworks, affinity, culturally sensitive therapy, I would say in early 2000s. Like it's really new language in the field. And so that's where my interest came and sort of my curiosity. What was this feeling happening within me, actually? And what was happening in them? And it was affinity. I learned that when I went to lucky enough to attend a People of Color conference once
wow,
in
okay.
my career, and I built all this language. And once I became, a therapist in private practice, my picture went up on the website.
That's amazing.
And because my name doesn't necessarily match my cultural background.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, because my name is Anjali,
Okay.
and because I grew up in small town Sarnia in the 70s, Sarnia is a really small farming community.
Yes.
And my parents just kind of called me Angie because I think that was a way to fit in, white Ontario at that time. And then my partner is, not South Asian. So, in a bicultural relationship, my name became Angie Holstein. I sort of lost a bit of that identity. So it was interesting when I popped my face up on the web, I started to get, honestly, it was amazing. South Asian clients coming for trauma work, because by trade I'm a trauma specialist. I do EMDR work and somatic work. And I was having clients of all ages, lots of young women seeking trauma work, South Asian women, but all the way up to 70.
Wow.
Which just my brain went, psh, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
things are changing. So that's where the piece came around Shanti. That's how Shanti sort of built. The idea sparked was really about 60% of my clients ended up being South Asian anyways. What would it be like to actually name in a practice that this is what we do loud and proud? Because there is the lived experience that bleeds into therapy. So I'll give you an example of that. Why culturally, cultural affinity can be so helpful in therapy is that if we look at boundaries, like Western culture boundaries, they don't work in our culture.
No, not
Like
at all.
absolutely
Yeah.
not. Because our family, our value and belief system as South Asians, our identities are built from within our families. So we can't have the same boundary systems within very different cultural values and beliefs and nuances. We just can't do that. So that's one umbrella of Shanti, is, really providing that affinity-based, culturally sensitive therapy to our population, right? That we need to be, with every South Asian, we're treating attachment disruptions and intergenerational trauma, right? We're only not even a century really away from, partition. So the other pieces for me, pardon me, around Shanti is that my father was an international student in the 60s. And he left home, as he said. He called it home till he died at 70. And he would process a lot of the trauma of being an international student, like in strange ways. Like he would talk about how he would have to make his own food. And I'd be like, Dad, like just make yourself some toast. Like what's the big deal? But it wasn't to him. It was something that it was a really traumatic loss for him. The love and care that came from sabjis and dal and his mother taking care of him. And then all of a sudden at 17, when your brain isn't even cooked yet, he found himself like totally disconnected from his family because we didn't have FaceTime. We didn't have internet then. And when we would call India, it would just be this like, right? The crackle and the faint voice, hello, hello. There was no connection. And so, I really, and I would listen to his friends and people from other cultures as well. My parents had a lot of different kinds of friends, like from different, diverse backgrounds from us. And I would listen to this thread around the trauma of being an international student. And then, in the last few years, I was getting a lot of international students coming to me, but by the time they were coming to me, they were experiencing suicidality. We know the high suicide rates that we're dealing with now, and this really hidden issue, not so hidden thanks to the media, around what's actually happening for international students. So a big part of Shanti is the community outreach. So we're doing a lot of work, like trying to work within colleges, trying to educate through social media around, the amazing parts of study abroad and that what you're not going to be, not what's not being told to you through, because of, a lot of students talk about the bubble bursting. So all the images they see on social media, the preparatory schools, really are focused on the academics, etc., and not really how hard it's going to be. So that, I started some, outreach work both in India and here. So Shanti has a number of different umbrellas in addition to the clinical work. And really, a core value is around destigmatizing.
I think a lot of things that you just spoke about relate to like the higher majority of population that we're seeing here now in India, that are coming here from India.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of them, like when you just look at them, you can tell the sense of disappointment you see in them because they came here with big dreams.
Yes.
And like just the other day I heard about how 25 students are living in a basement.
Yes.
Like just imagine what that probably feels like when they were flying down to Canada. They probably had so many ideas of like, we're going to make it. We're going to have that dream life we see online. And then they come here and they have to start from scratch. They're not treated as equally as everyone else. And starting from scratch. So a lot of the things you said. And another thing that I loved what you said is through helping other people, you also understood yourself a lot more. Yes. And that's the one thing I love about like the whole topic of therapy. It's like it's not only about your service to other people, but also understanding where you can improve and like what are the other things that bother you, and then using that towards healing yourself while also healing other people as well. So it's always like a two-way thing.
It is. It's because part of being a therapist and the responsibility of being a therapist is being able to, do your own work.
Yes.
Like it's part of the gig. You have to do your own work in order to deliver it effectively. So that part is always fascinating and changing through every decade.
Mm-hmm. Right? So I want to come a little bit into the nitty-gritty.
Sure.
I did see this on your website, on your bio, and when I read this, it felt like almost like a missing puzzle piece, and like all these questions started to come in my mind. So I just want to bring that up. You said that there's this belief system that you've noticed within South Asians of, I'm not good enough. So when I heard that, the first thing that I thought about was the stereotype that we have as South Asians of being very hardworking. Mm-hmm. Like everyone who knows has been like, oh, South Asian, they're probably the hardest working people in the room. So that's one thing. And the second thing is the competition we have in our community, no matter what we do. And also the thought of like, we never stop. Like it's like we're constantly on the go. So for me, when I heard that I'm not good enough might be the back of our minds, I was like, is this what's keeping all those things going? Or is that like, are we compensating for that belief system? But I wanted to hear it from you.
I really appreciate that stuck out for you because I think that, I think cross-culturally, just based on not having skills to deal with shame and failure because we're so growth mindset. And in particular, I think what you're asking is why? Right? Like why in our culture is there so much prevalence around this belief system, I'm not good enough? Right. And that steers us towards understanding intergenerational trauma. Yeah. Why are we the most hardworking? What has happened that has created that urgency? Right? So, we look back and we have to look back into history to understand what's literally in our DNA. Because intergenerational trauma isn't a theory, it's genetics, right? There's epigenetics, which looks at the impact of trauma and the changes to the genes. So we can trace for 3 generations, when trauma occurs, it alters the genes and then gets passed to the next generation. And depending on what's in that generational environment, will it get unlocked?
Okay.
And unless there's something that can start to heal that, right, neurologically, in the attachment system, in the biological systems, then we go to the next generation. So if we go back 3 generations, well, what was happening in Punjab? Well, it wasn't even Punjab back then, it was India, right? What was happening in Sri Lanka? There was civil war, there was colonialism, there was poverty. And if you look at the concepts of colonialism, the concept was less than, right? So there was the British rulers that were the elite. And what we've heard from many people of that time, including my nanny. I heard lots of stories that she was part, she was a freedom fighter. I heard a lot of stories and what it was like. And she told me stories about how people didn't have like name identification cards, like you weren't a person.
Oh my God, that's intense.
So we look at that, like what's coming down from that trauma. I'm less than, and how do I build myself up? Because we're designed to survive. We can't stay in that depressed state.
Right.
So we look at then survival. How did people survive during colonialism? Well, it was to be perfect, to not take up too much space, not draw attention, just be a really, really good worker, and then you wouldn't get hurt or killed. So we look at traits, perfectionism, urgency, right? Really, really high unrealistic standards because they're survival mechanisms. And then here we go. Then we have migration. And we live in societies that are still systems, have lots of loving people in those systems, but the systems are still designed to maintain white supremacy. So again, here it's happening again. So again, see, that unlocks that intergenerational trauma, like what's coming down in the genes. So, yeah, we have.
It's a lot, yeah.
And then how does that affect one's parenting? So I'll give you a real life story of how I even understood this within myself. My father, his only way out of Calcutta as a poor kid was academics. Like he probably should have been, he was a beautiful classical singer, played harmonium, tabla, he was an amazing musician, but he went into engineering. So he always had to get 100%. Everything was about getting 100%. So fast forward to being a dad with 2 kids, I came home and in the 80s, we had grade 13. Oh, okay. So in grade 13 calculus, I got 98%. I was like, guys, I got 98%. I came home and he's like, what happened? You lost the 2%.
Relatable.
And right? Relatable. And when I tell this story, like in brown spaces, there's a lot of like painful laughter. Like we laugh about it because we relate, and there's also pain there. And at the time, what would it have taught me with my developing brain, right, was that I wasn't good enough. Nothing I ever did was good enough. And I learned that about myself, right? So it became this like repeated belief system, like I tell myself that, and then it just makes me try to work harder. Born as a perfectionist, right? I like to call myself a reformed perfectionist.
Yeah, same. Can relate to that
Can
too.
relate.
Yeah.
So, was my dad abusive? Well, I mean, it was pretty, we would classify that as, emotionally harsh parenting, authoritarian parenting. Mm-hmm. And most South Asian parents, based on the anxiety, again, coming down intergenerationally, a symptom of that is critical parenting. Just I'm going to motivate my kids by criticizing them. I'm never going to notice what they're doing well. I'm going to go, but focus on this, right? So what I learned over time, this was a survival mechanism for him. And really the message in that criticism was, I love you so much. I need you to do 100% so that you're safe. And I can go, right? It was underneath all the trauma is deep love, but it disconnects, right? So again, we look at families, our intergenerational trauma disconnects this very deep love within families through criticism, anxiety, perfectionism, and just trying to survive.
That was actually another topic that I wanted to discuss with you, which is survival mode. And when it comes to especially the Sri Lankan community, because we fled from a war, I personally can't really relate to that, but a lot of people that I hear talking about it, they left homes, they left their families and came here to start from scratch all over again in a country where they didn't even know the language, and that's still in their minds. And till today, they haven't really healed from what happened because there was really no solution to what happened. That's where right. They can come here and say, okay, I left a better place, because here they're working 3 jobs. They're barely home with their children. So I was actually a youth outreach worker before, and one of the common themes that I would hear with children is, I just want my parents to be home.
Yes.
And every time I heard that, my heart
Yes.
would break, because and these are not little children, these are high school. So they really wanted their parents to be home, but the reason they weren't home is not because they didn't love them. They needed to survive. And on the other side, on the other extreme, they're competing to have the biggest house, the best cars, the best jobs, so that it looks good to society, so they can say, okay, I have accomplished something, I am successful.
That's right.
So they're not working one job, they're working 3 jobs. So they're constantly outside the home, and that caused that disconnect. So every time I would talk to these high school students, they're like, we just want parents home. So when it comes to survival mode, it's a term that we hear so often, but when it comes to your work, how can we heal from survival mode, get out of that system, and go into living and actually experiencing life?
That's a great question. And I love that example, like thinking about and kind of reflecting on what you've heard and what families say and what kids say. Because those kids are saying, I need you.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then I would actually connect this to your earlier question around I'm not good enough. What's driving those parents to work those 3 jobs, to have the bigger double-car garage, blah, blah, blah? I'm not good enough. Oh, see? I finally got the house. I'm good enough until you start the next thing. So again, how do you weed through and heal from the trauma? Well, the first thing is around being able to have self-awareness. How does survival show up for me? Because it shows up differently for different people, right? How you self-medicate that anxiety. So many ways. So if we look at that example, we have to be able to start to look inward, because we're really trained, and when there's a lot of trauma, it's really hard to tolerate your inner experience. And that's part of what the workaholism is, right? Or substance abuse, or busyness, like the addiction of all of that, screens, TV. It's really dissociation out of the body, because it's so hard to tolerate the pain that's in the body. So what we see is people who are disembodied, and our eyes point out. So it's very easy to do that, to focus on what's in our environment instead of taking those moments to understand what's going on with me right now, right? Just even say, what's going on? I love Gabor Mate, and he has this beautiful way of just saying, gosh, go in, point down, what's going on inside here. So it's almost like we have to help people get to know themselves, because all of the survival pieces you just described are all automatic. Like we could open up our brains, we'd see a series of circuits, and this is just how the circuit's wired. Well, until we go in and look at the circuit, body, thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, right? Only then can we understand what's automatically happening, what's working, what's not, right? So it helps, even be able to check in with parents, are you missing your kids? So even if the family has to work 3 jobs, we get the parent to actually feel their feelings, so that they can attune to their child, even to have, compassionate conversations about how this is really hard and why this is happening. It's not because I don't want to spend time with you. You're awesome.
Mm-hmm. But is this also why people struggle to spend time with themselves? The reason, I've noticed this especially with, let's say my age people. When we sit still, we're never sitting there. It's always, you need a device, you need the phone, the TV playing in the background, you need some sort of distraction. It's never peace and quiet where we're just with ourselves. But is this why? Because it's all the constant questions that keep coming up that they don't want to deal with?
I mean, if people did an experiment and sat for 30 seconds, what would come up? Probably initially, for people that keep themselves busy that way, or if we keep that common language of disembodiment, probably wouldn't feel good. And we don't learn as kids, in schools. I know there's initiatives for that to change. And I know there's initiatives in, intentional parenting, connected parenting, to teach the next generation tolerance for distress. Mm-hmm. So as soon as we feel that distress, like we sit for 30 seconds, yeah, thoughts are going to come up, worries are going to come flooding forward, right? Maybe difficult memories. And we go, oh, pull out my phone. I can lessen that. So we learn that we can lessen the feeling, because it works, by moving outside of ourselves. But it actually, what it does is it increases those feelings inside. Like if you think about it like pressure. The pressure increases inside, but we can focus on something else and ignore it till it tumbles out in other ways, where you need to up the self-medication, drown yourself in a bag of Doritos, substances, cigarettes, vaping. These are all ways of, again, taking ourselves out of the body. And with South Asians, there's a lot of, bodies of cultures are pain bodies, right? That's coming down generationally. So there is that piece. Like, how do we change that? And that's one of the things that therapy helps with. Sometimes I sit with my clients and it's just like, can we just go in and notice what's going on? And I'm going to be right here with you. I'm just going to sit and notice, collect some data. So it doesn't have to feel so scary, and they know I can come out of that. So it's little bits of exposure therapy, even just being in the body. Sometimes people can only tolerate 5 seconds of that, and they got to pop out. So it's just about learning about yourself. What's going on in here, and we've got a neck. How do those two, how does the brain and body connect? What shows up?
Okay, so given how intense all this work is for someone to do on their own, how can we start being more compassionate with ourselves while learning all these things about ourselves? And not just with us, but I feel like the more we look into therapy and realize that some of the issues, I'll say that in quotes, that we have did come from generations before, how do we translate that into compassion for our parents instead of saying, this was all your fault and this is why I am the way I am?
Yeah.
And also the other question is, how do we turn up the kinder voice in our heads and turn down the critical one that's always like that's a reflection sometimes of a parent who used to criticize us, is now within our minds. So how do we turn down that and turn up the compassion for ourselves and for other people?
Isn't that the goal?
Yeah.
Just nailed it. Just nailed it. That's the goal.
Right.
And again, it goes, a lot of my framework around what we call interpersonal neurobiology. What's going on in the brain and how is it wired? So if you think about repetitive statements, right, or criticism, you're absolutely right that it becomes a voice. It's our voice, but it's a voice that mimicked what we heard. So if a parent says, you need to get 100% in math, well, then it becomes your goals, because it's a way of staying safe and connected with the parent. Because to not get 100% or strive towards that makes the relationship distance more. And we actually, we're only as healthy as our relationships and our connections.
Absolutely.
Right? We thrive on that. In fact, it's a biological need. So part of it, I really love how you led with the first question around compassion for our parents. And sometimes we need to first feel some healthy anger about what happened to us. To be able to acknowledge this was not okay. So for the example I gave, it was not okay that my hard work, my effort, my trying to please my parents and be good, all of that got missed. That wasn't okay. And there could be compassion for the father who had struggled so much that this was his way to make me safe. And I think we tend to need, we really are designed for all or nothing thinking, when really things are both. And that's where compassion breeds, is when both can be true. Our pain and impact from our parents is absolutely valid and true, and it's something that needs to be understood from a trauma framework, which is, this trauma happened to me. And this is what I ended up telling myself as a way to understand what was happening to me versus this is who I am. Right? And then being able to reflect on the intentions of our parents. And impact is more, always. Intentions are important as well, so that we understand, and when you dig, you'll find that it tends to be out of anxious parenting, traumatized parents. Parents that didn't probably get what they needed from their parents. So we look at, the emotionally distant parent. Did that parent learn any emotional language? Probably not. Are they willing to learn? Maybe. If they're not, it doesn't mean that you can't stay connected to them. Because ultimately that's where we go into compassion. Self-compassion is about rewiring the brain. So that those voices around criticism, we know that belongs to somebody else. I can give that back. I can let that go. Oh, no, that is absolutely part of all the trauma. Gosh, listen to that. Here it comes again. So we distance ourselves a little bit from it into the reality of how it got created. It's not your voice. And we start to layer in, right, and build new wires and then myelinate those wires by practice, just, the concepts of self-compassion, which is self-kindness, self-love, and just even naming when things are hard. Like, this is really hard right now, or, oh, I failed at this podcast, or I failed at, this endeavor, I failed my test. Oh, that's hard. That's self-compassion. It's just like microdosing on that. And then it starts to change your brain. So those wires, those messages get louder, the old patterns get a little bit quieter. And it doesn't mean that those old patterns go away. It means that they just get quieter. And in moments of stress, they'll come roaring back to the surface. And it's about reminding yourself, oh, okay, there's that old voice. There's those old patterns. I'm going to remind myself to dip back into self-compassion. Sometimes I tell my clients to put up, could we create a visual, like almost our own social media post? Can you show, like, the flowers getting watered with nourishing water? That's what flowers need to grow. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things. And what would the picture look like if we were pouring acid on this same flower? What would it look like? Pop that up as like just little ways to remind yourself what's different.
That's a really good point. And I think I've also heard where people say that critical voice, give it a name. So it actually seems like a person that you can be like, okay, you can stop talking now. I will focus on the kinder side and focus on that. So when you give a name to that person, you think of it as a person instead of saying, oh my God, that's me. That's right. And again, it comes back to the compassion.
And you could love that part. I know it sounds odd, because that's where the compassion for and love for your parents will grow. Because, I work from, the tenets of, like, there's no bad part inside of us. And so that critical voice comes up. What's the job of that voice? What's this part worried about? What is happening that's triggering that voice? So that you can help that part it's okay. Calm that place of emergency. That if I fail, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? It's going to feel really bad. That's going to really suck. And it will pass.
Okay
and that's okay. You'll survive it. Right? So if you almost create a relationship, or imagine that part, the critical part is like a fierce little child inside that's really scared, going bark, 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 instead of the fierceness that we felt as children looking up at this critical part, or the critical part of our parents. For them, it was their anxious child inside of them. That's what it presented with.
It just makes me want to have more compassion for parents, even thinking about what they went through in their generation and not being able to heal. Like, all this information that you're sharing now, I can only imagine how much it brings up emotions in parents, because they didn't have this information back then that we get so easy because we have trained therapists like you. But if those parents do attend therapy at least once.
I wish that happened
Oh my
more.
gosh, they would learn so much about themselves.
It's really hard, I find, with an older generation of parents. I'm really finding some shifts in the newer generation, but that doesn't mean it's, it's enough to really feel like, oh, okay, we're good, right? Because we've got so much embedded stigma and diversity within this umbrella term of South Asians, right? And it's really hard to face the pain that you might have hurt your child.
Yes, for sure.
So denial is a much safer place to be, which is really injurious and hard if you're looking for that or needing that validation. And we all need that validation. Don't deny that you need it.
Right.
We all need it. And your parent may or may not get there. So that's where boundaries come in, right? As adults, you can define the relationship you want with a parent. And, some parents are abusive. Some parents have really fallen down on the job. And again, as an adult, you get to choose the dynamic of that relationship. That's what's really important to really heal trauma, is to know that that time can be over. Because now I'm an adult. I can look at my hands and feet. My hands are much more wrinkly, right, than when I was little. And I can say, okay, I am an adult. We got to feel the adult within us and the choices that we have now.
So given that this generation, let's say like people in the 30s are now becoming parents, how can they take that step to say, I went through this and therefore I shouldn't let my kids go through that, or I shouldn't bring that behavior into my new home, instead of saying, I went through this, therefore you have to go through the same thing. So basically saying, it sucked for me, so it needs to be the same way for you. How can they switch that and say, for new parents, how can they say, because I went through this, let me change myself so that when I become a parent, or like if they have toddlers, how can I not pass that on to them?
I kind of think of parenting, like we just sort of fall into parenting. I mean, even as a therapist, I sort of did too. When I had my first son at 30, it was, I don't know how much intention I put behind it. Even though I was reading and I was like, and I was aware of this mantra was in the back, and I hear it a lot from clients. I don't want to, and I can really feel the panic in them when it's like, I'm really scared I'm going to pass this along. And sometimes it becomes a barrier to even having children. So I think similar to marriage, like we're going into a very specific kind of endeavor or life experience. Marriage, parenting, moving in with a partner, right? We don't all have to get married. We prepare way more for a trip to Mexico than we do for marriage, parenting, living with somebody. So I really encourage people, people think of therapy or, even if therapy is inaccessible or it's not for everybody, but even just, doing a workbook, start to journal, see a therapist for this piece of work. I'm going to become a parent. How do I frame what's my values? What's my beliefs? And how do I want to be?
So relating to what you said, it's funny because whenever I hear people are about to have a baby, there's like a trend now to go to yoga. And so not that I'm saying yoga is bad. Yoga is incredible, especially when you're bringing a new life into the world. But I wish the topic of also go to therapy so that you heal from your past and don't pass things on, because I'm very sensitive to that. When I see a pregnant woman and she's around someone who's screaming at her, I'm like, just move away. Your kid's hearing that. Or even when they're saying things like, oh, this is so hard, even though I completely understand, like I'm not a mother yet, but I know the pain that they go through is beyond this world. But to be saying that out loud, it is passing on to the child. They are listening to that, which is also relating to why they say to play good music all the time, because your child is listening to that, your baby's listening to that. It also applies to all the criticism that you hear and also say out loud.
That's right. I mean, I think what you're speaking to is how do we manage the cortisol in our body?
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I actually love that there's so much prenatal yoga, right? Because there's the embodiment. You have to be in a loving space with your body. Yeah. It's connection. And I agree with you, right? To, self-awareness and awareness around what's happening to you is so important. To know, is there anything within my power that needs to shift? So if someone's screaming and yelling around your child, or you're having arguments in front of your child, well, you're impacting your child. Even if they're not the ones being screamed and yelled at.
Exactly. The indirect, whatever they're hearing, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so When it comes to relationships, I'm just taking a step into details. When it comes to relationships, how important is it in the perspective of a therapist to heal from your experiences before moving into a new relationship? Because a trend that I've seen now is that, it's just like constant, like people are dating back and forth, they're dating 5-6 people at the same time, like there's all sorts of things that are happening, but which isn't wrong, but to take the time to truly heal yourself after one experience and say, okay, what went wrong? How can I heal? What do I really need for myself? Based on your experience, what would you say?
I think that's an interesting point about like just even your gesture about what went wrong, what happened. It's again, there's the introception, right? Going in, the embodiment. Can I embody the reflect and go back and reflect on the relationship, especially when the initial pain starts to go down? Because it's hard to think when you're in such distress. And the ending of a relationship is painful, even if it's a healthy ending.
Of course, yeah.
Because it's loss. And relationships are meant to be for a period of time, and some relationships are meant to end. That's normal. I think people don't tell us that not everybody in our life is going to be there forever. And there's value in getting to know yourself through different relationships, but we look at it as a failure. This is where the mindset pieces can come in, right? Growth and development. And how do you, if it's not innate in you, if it wasn't taught to you, how do you learn that? So that you are going into, if it is a goal of yours to be in a long-term relationship, to know what you want from that. What does that look like? And getting to know what we call the attachment system. Like we all have this neurobiological system within us, right? That teaches us, it develops all the way up until age 18. It's really formed in those early years, and it's all based on the relationship within our families with our caregivers. So if you had an inconsistent relationship or unpredictable, like the parent loved you while you're doing really awesome, and then when you weren't, they were mad at you, so suddenly they're like stonewalling or withdrawn, you learn that relationships can't be trusted. Intimacy is dangerous because sometimes people are there and sometimes they'll let you down. So you go into your adult relationships recreating, and this is neurobiological. This is not woo-woo, right? We've got lots of research to help us understand this. And so it is really important. I think it's a wonderful exercise. I wish I had known more about it in my 20s. That when you're in a long-term relationship, that person's attachment system is colliding with your attachment system to link up and create the dynamics within your own. So just knowing yourself, it doesn't mean you have to heal from every part. It's just knowing, right? So it's like when you say this to me, it really triggers me in this way. It's communication, right? So can your partner anticipate if you're anxiously attached, like you feel a lot of abandonment when your partner leaves to go out with his friends or their friends? Could your partner be sensitive to that? To say, I'm going to miss you and I'm going to be back at this time. And you express, yeah, I'm going to do some breathing. I'm going to have a plan. It's going to feel weird. And you kind of work through it together. So partners can heal from their attachment system together, what's better than that?
Which transitions to my next question, couples therapy. One of the things that I hear about all the time, if a couple says, oh, we're going to couples therapy, the first thing that you think about is like, oh, what's wrong? And it's always the first question you ask. It's like, is something happening? Like, is that why you're going to couples therapy? But how can we change that mindset, especially I think in our community, to say, no, sometimes having a third person to give you an unbiased opinion about whatever you're experiencing, or even if you're not experiencing an issue that you're dealing with, just improve the relationship, make it better for both of you, from a person that's educated in that space, who understands both of you from the ways you are. How are some ways we can change that mindset of saying, no, you can go to couples therapy when you're not having issues?
And it's interesting, like, even your question when you say, we're going to couples therapy, oh, what's wrong? Like, I wish we could get to the point of like fist bumping that person.
Exactly, right? And being like, great job.
How much courage it would take to go and do that.
Yeah.
You know, you must really love each other.
Exactly.
You must
That's
really
a
care
huge
about,
shift.
you know, giving this a go and seeing where this could go. Because the fact is that many couples cross-culturally go to couples counseling because there are issues. And that's a good thing. Every relationship has issues.
Yeah.
And every developmental stage of a relationship brings up issues, right? So when you move out of your 20s where, like, I'm just talking about even my own experience, like, yay, you know, fun. And then parenthood, whew, the first kid is like a bomb being dropped in your house. Buying a home, or where do we live? Like all of these different stages bring up and can create or exacerbate existing issues. So really what couples therapy is about is, you know, being able to deal with problems together. So typically we move away from each other and we disconnect in our entrenched ideas, right? Versus how do we learn to actually come together, connect, and be in the distress together, right? To learn to have distressing conversations, to be able to say to each other, like, yeah, there's some perpetual problems. Like, this is one of those issues that keeps coming up for us. Let's talk. Or let's take a break. Come back later. The other piece with couples therapy is that, you know, we really look at connection. Like, couples therapy is a wonderful place to actually strengthen, as you said, the connection. So it can be to deal with some issues, come to, you know, learn how to talk about parenting, really focus on your communication skills, strengthen love, intimacy, and to also, you know, be in a compassionate place with each other. Because long-term relationships will default into shame and blame. So if you're going for couples counseling, you're just developing skills to reduce the amount of disconnection that happens with couples. Happens to all of us, right? These moments, they can be micro moments throughout the day. So, you know, even the act of going to couples therapy is like amazing.
But I think this also comes back to the topic of communication and like the role of language in like the way we think about ourselves and other people, and also parents and children. Like the role of language is so huge. So my question would be, how does language just in general affect how we are in daily lives, and even when it comes to like couples, to improving the relationship that they have? What are some, I would say, I don't know how to frame this, but maybe terms that we use that could take a conversation down the wrong road?
Right.
And what are some words that you suggest would improve, like, or ways of asking questions or saying how you feel?
I think the repeated word you're using is really part of the answer, is questions. Because we go really, really fast into assumptions and anxiousness when we feel that there's going to be like some sort of discourse in communication. And language is really powerful. So if I say, you did this, as opposed to, I'm feeling this way, I don't know if that's your intention. Can we talk about this? Like, we want to look at, sometimes I think about it like softening language, because we also use a lot of catastrophic language.
We do.
Right? Like, I'm having an OCD moment.
Yes.
No, you're not.
Yes.
Right? Let's really pay attention to what we're saying. And I don't say that like judgmentally, like stop it. It is about, what is it? What's happening in me that I'm using this really catastrophic language? Because language will reflect what generates within our bodies. Our brain codes it and goes, oh, something really bad's happening here. The cortisol goes up, and our ability to relate to each other, because if we look at left brain, language and learning, right brain is the emotion center, memories, creativity. Well, the right brain's a boss. So when that stress starts to build based on how you're talking, how you're responding, our relational abilities go down, which means our communication gets really compromised. So just listen to yourself.
This is a question that's a little bit away from the conversation we're having now about So many people in our generation believes in the law of attraction. So you hear all these things, you see it on social media all the time. It's like, just believe something and it will keep happening. When it comes to a little bit about, I think changing that, like we were talking about this before, but changing the negative into positive. Do you believe that we really do attract people and circumstances in our lives based on the law of attraction and based on our belief systems?
Yeah.
They usually say if there's a person that's criticizing you on the outside, it's because it's to reflect the voice inside you that's criticizing yourself. But do you believe in that? Like, is that from a therapy point of view?
I
Not
think
a spiritual.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's so much that's unknown in the spiritual world that I don't, and I'm open to the possibilities of anything. I think sometimes the terms of like law of attraction becomes where we over rely on something that without feeling our own agency as part of that. Like, because I think it's important to have a mindset that's focused on possibilities. And where we can dip into is like that toxic positivity. I read a great article once about toxic positivity because it doesn't leave space for the compassion for suffering and the hardship, right? Again, both can be true. Like, how do we have more balanced thinking? That's why I use the word possibilities. So we live what we believe. So if you believe that you're not deserving of love, it will show up in the 90% of your nonverbals and your interaction, your relational abilities. So just thinking and saying like, I'm going to find love, I think that's really important because that means you're in a place of regulating. And can you notice, is there any parts that are suffering as well? Is there any part of you that's scared that you're not going to find love? And can you attune to that as well? Because if you're only attuning hyper-focused on the positive, then all the parts of you that are scared or ashamed or sad, they don't have that space to be able to really authentically understand and that you can authentically believe that you're deserving of love. Like, that's what I would say more, encouraging people to reframe their negative beliefs about themselves, like even say to themselves in the mirror, instead of I'm not deserving of love, focus on that. I'm deserving of love. Maybe play yourself a love song, right? Like just looking at that, that's what I mean about like we change those tapes. And then it manifests into how we relate to each other. Because if I go into a room small and invisible, well, because I'm not good enough, well, that's what I'm going to manifest, right? Because that's how I teach people to treat me.
Wow. If we wanted that kind of language to start at a younger age with children, let's say there was something that you could shift within our school system to have this type of work in, what's something you wish you could change within our school system now?
I wish emotion regulation and self-compassion, mindfulness, I wish it was an equal part of the curriculum. Instead of, when I've done them in schools, they tend to be like one-offs or like a workshop or a lunch and learn. And I know there's a lot of initiatives within teachers. We have so many teachers that embed and embody this in their classrooms. And there are those pioneers in the education system. So even, I think it's more about, it's really hard for systems to change, right? So our school system is really entrenched in sort of that, like we're still doing a lot of the things, my kids are, teenagers now, but we're really entrenched in the ways that I went to high school. Like it hasn't changed much in that sense. But what if we had a course on self-compassion? Like what if we were teaching self-compassion, mindfulness, zones of regulation, which a lot, that has been a big change, but we need to be doing that from, preschool onwards. So it's not like a novelty, it just gets embedded in the brain that's growing, right? So it's installed in there and the brain grows with that.
I feel like I can talk to you forever.
I
But
feel the same.
we do need to wrap up the
Yes.
episode, but before we go, I do want to know if you can tell our audience a little bit about the services that exist in Shanti Psychotherapy now, and the best way to reach you.
So, Shanti Psychotherapy, we have a number of clinicians, and with varied backgrounds and years of experience, because we're a small, close, supportive team. Because our health of our team reflects in how we can support our clients. So we've got clinicians that speak different languages: Tamil, Hindi, English, Punjabi, and so what we're offering in terms of clinical work, we have individual therapy for adults and children and teenagers. We have family therapy. So if you think about, the acrimony between, let's look at first and second gen families, like how I was. Whoa, there's a lot of anxiety for parents, a lot of struggles being a teenager. First-gen families. There's couples therapy, and we do trauma work, hypnotherapy, EMDR. So we have different treatment modalities within. We have reduced rates and a separate kind of specialization for working with international students. So the clinicians, for international students have been international students themselves. So I think that we felt that was really important, because international students need someone even to be able to ask about this form. They need to have, like, a therapist can also be an anchor in terms of navigating systems. So it was really important to have that lived experience. We also do workshops. So we're out in the community, which is amazing, doing workshops for international students. I do trainings on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I go out to teams and work on self-compassion in teams. I've done a lot of what I call my road show, so talking to doctors, teachers, social workers out in universities, teaching about South Asian mental health to frontline staff and trauma, so that people can understand that the language and mental health issues present differently in our community. Exactly. We don't show up going, I'm depressed. We show up going, I've had stomach issues. I have chronic headaches. We need frontline staff to be trained to be able to be asking different kinds of questions to the South Asian population, so that they're adequately getting that mental health support. And a big part of that as well is helping to train people in how to engage conversations with South Asian people, how to bridge the stigma, how to get to that recommendation as a doctor. You're so powerful as a doctor, right? We listen to our doctors as a community. So how can you start to talk about this with your South Asian clients a little bit differently to motivate them to be able to engage in mental health support?
Every time I hear you speak about the work that you're doing, the only thing I can keep saying is we need more people like you. And I can't thank you enough for the work you do for our community, because especially now when we have more international students here, I think the work that you're doing will be so incredibly helpful to them. So I really hope you do get more of the reach and more clients through the work, because I can't talk enough about all the work you do. But thank you again for being here, for taking your time. And I'm pretty sure this conversation will change some people's mindset about mental health care, and I hope it does. So, and I'm sure you'll see more people coming your way. So thank you for being here.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. And your questions were really I would say the same, that your questions are really going to help and impact a lot of people.
I'm speaking for the community.
Yes.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and follow on Spotify. Till next time.